Welcome to my talk on modern frontends using Spring Boot and Thymeleaf with htmx. My name is Wim Deblauwe. I'm a freelance Java developer in Belgium, and I currently work for Sweet Mustard. I'm the author. Okay. Now you can hear me, I guess. I'm the author of the book Taming Thymeleaf. It's an in-depth guide to building a web application using Spring Boot and Thymeleaf. And I really love to work with Java, Spring, Thymeleaf, and ASCII Doctor, as these tools make me very productive and they are a joy to work with. I will be talking today about Thymeleaf, giving a bit of an introduction to what it is, and also expand onto that with htmx to build dynamic front ends. The second half of the session will be lots of demos to see how you can apply this to your projects. To get started, what exactly is Thymeleaf? If we quote the website, Thymeleaf is a server-side Java template engine that uses natural templates to generate HTML pages. This definition packs a lot of information, so let's break it down. Server-side Java template engine, this indicates that it's a template engine intended to run at the server side of a typical client-server application, and it's written in Java. Natural templates, this means that the template can be used as a prototype in the browser without the template engine having to be active, which is great if you need to interact with designers that don't want to run your application itself. And then generate HTML pages. This is in fact the most important part of Thymeleaf, to generate HTML pages that will get sent to the client or the browser. If you take a closer look on how this works exactly, if we start at the diagram at the top left corner, we see the browser issuing a GET request to the application. Our Spring application will find a controller that matches with that URL. Inside the controller method, the model will be injected by Spring, and we can use that model to add attributes, let's say variables, to the model. At the end of the method of the controller will indicate what Thymeleaf template should be used, and the application will find that template. And using both the variables in the model and the Thymeleaf template, the Thymeleaf engine will generate HTML. The HTML is returned to the application, and the application will return the HTML to the browser, which then can display the page. Before we continue, a bit of terminology. So SPA versus MPA. SPA is a single page application. So this is your typical application using JavaScript in the browser, runs entirely in the browser. And the technology used there is Angular or React, sometimes Vue or Svelte as well. Opposed to that, we have the MPA, or a multi-page application, also called sometimes classic server-side rendering, where each page is refreshed. Each page refresh needs a new page from the server, and mostly used technology there is Django with Python, or Laravel in PHP, and of course, in the Java world, there's Spring Boot and Thymeleaf. What are some of the consequences of using SSR, server-side rendering, so /MPAs? You don't need any JavaScript to run the page or to display the page. You can have very, very lightweight pages using only HTML and CSS, and that's all that's needed. The consequence of that is that there's no dependency on how powerful your client is to render. If you're having lots of JavaScript that needs to run, if you're on a low-powered device, the speed of your application might be impacted by that. Also, you don't need JavaScript to develop the page. Of course, you can use TypeScript as well with SPAs, but with server-side rendering, you can really choose whatever technology that can render HTML. That's all you need. Okay. Search engine optimization. It's very important if you want to be found by Google or any other search engine, that the indexing robots can index your pages. Within SPA, that's hard because then your indexing robot would need to run your JavaScript to see what's really on the page. With server-side rendering, the content is readily available for the robot to index. And then, of course, with MPAs, your page changes need a round trip to the server. That's often seen as a drawback of MPAs because it's less interactive, less dynamic, because you need this page refresh each time. Note, however, with an SPA, you can also have page refreshes if the user just presses the refresh button in the browser or he tries to open a second tab. Then you will also have this round trip to the server plus the cost of building your application in JavaScript at the front end. Some other consequences is related to caching. The browser does do a lot of caching out of the box. If you add the proper headers like e tags or modified since headers, and with SPAs, sometimes you will need to manually implement these kind of things that otherwise happen out of the box. Each page in an MPA needs a URL. It's just the way it works. So your whole application becomes deep linkable by default. With an SPA, if the developers are not careful, then your URL would never change. And then it's quite impossible to link to a particular page or a particular state of the application. Because we don't need JavaScript, or maybe we just need a bit of JavaScript, the page sizes tend to be smaller with an MPA. Of course, the SPA has the advantage, once the application is loaded, they can communicate more efficiently using only small JSON payloads. And this last point, you can really look at this from two different ways. With an MPA, it's more integrated, so it's easier to have a coherent team. And on the other side, it's of course harder to split the team. If you're using an Angular or React application, then it becomes quite easy to split the team along the technology boundaries. But maybe, do you really want to split on the technology boundaries? Maybe you want to split on a functional level. Now we'll look into more detail on how this looks in code. So this is a standard Spring controller. As you can see by the controller annotation on line 8 and the @request mapping on line 9. We have in this class one method, the index method, which annotated with the get mapping. So indicating that if there is a get request to this application on the root URL, Spring will end up inside this method. And in this method, we build up a list, simple list of 3 names, and we put that list under the key scientists. And then on line 18, we return index, which indicates that we want to use the index.html Thymeleaf template to render this. How does such a Thymeleaf template look like? Well, we can start with just the basic HTML5 page, nothing special here, and we add the th namespace to that. Once we have that, we can start using special Thymeleaf attributes inside our page. So here on line 10, we have the h1 tag. Inside of the tag, we have the scientist, hard-coded, which is what our designer would see, just the hard-coded name. But then at runtime, this will be replaced by whatever is inside the th text. In this case, the # indicates the translation. So the scientist.title would be looked up in the messages.properties of the Spring application, and the translation of your current user's language will be used. Also, our scientist variable we can use, and we can iterate over this list of scientist names and build up our different LE items. So rendering this in the application, we end up with this result, just a simple web application showing 3 names there. Now, to continue, page reloads, are they really, really that bad? And what this person tells us that they're not that bad as long as they're fast. So, because they have the advantages of bookmarkability, the browser back button works as expected, you can just open multiple tabs, everything works like that. But of course, it's not enough today to just have page refreshes all of the time. People expect more. They expect dynamic behavior, little things that happen on the page quickly. So if I want that, do I really have to go all in on Angular or React or any of the other SPA technologies? Because even people in the space are saying that it's coming really, really complex to do that. If you know Thoughtworks, they have a technology radar, and in their last episode of the technology radar, they have put SPA by default on hold. And I'm just going to read what they say about it. SPAs incur complexity that simply doesn't exist with traditional server-based websites. Too often, though, we don't see teams making that trade-off analysis, blindly accepting the complexities of SPAs by default, even when the business needs don't justify it. So what they're saying is, think twice before you invest in building an SPA. Maybe there's no need for it. Now, to bring modern frontends to Thymeleaf, there's some options. And we have Unpoly and Hotwire and htmx, and they are 3 libraries kind of doing the same thing. Hotwire is more in the Ruby on the Rails space. It's written by the people of Basecamp for their Hey client. And here I will take a deeper look into htmx. So what is htmx? It's a JavaScript library, and in the beginning we only had like links, hyperlinks to navigate from one page to another. Then later on forms were added so we can send data to the server, get information back, and that's where HTML stopped. And htmx is like taking that idea further, allowing on any HTML tag to add attributes to do calls to the server, to do gets or posts or reads or whatever. And so you can attach them to any HTML elements. The big change here, compared to what we're used to, is sending JSON back and forth. Here we will use HTML. So you send a request to the server, and the server responds, not with JSON, but little snippets of HTML, and they will get dynamically swapped into the application. The big advantage of htmx is we don't need to go all in on day one of our project. We can start our project classically, and then where we say, oh, it really would be better for user experience that we can have small little updates here and there, then you can just apply that selectively where it makes sense. Finally, htmx is really agnostic. As long as you can send HTML back, it works. So you can use it with Java, but also with .NET or PHP, Python, whatever language you want. Now we'll take a closer look on how this looks in code. You see some attributes there, all starting with hx. So you have the hx get, the hx trigger, and the hx target. Let's start with the hx trigger. So what this means, we're attaching this to an input field. So whenever there's a key up event on the input and something actually changed, and we have a bounce of 500 milliseconds, so nothing changed in the last 500 milliseconds, then htmx will do a get request to the backend using the /trigger delay endpoint. This endpoint will send us back the search results in HTML format, and then with the hx target, we say, just take that snippet of HTML and put it into the div with the ID of the search results. We'll look into a demo right now that shows how this works. So this is the htmx website, and we have the active search example. There's lots of examples there. So here we have a demo. We see an empty table, and we can just start to type stuff. And you see that the table updates dynamically. And here at the bottom is where the interesting part is. So initially, we render the full up page with the empty search results and the table headers. And then as soon as we start to type, there's a post request done in this case towards the server, and the server responds with the HTML. And we see each time, and this responds to what we saw happening on the page itself as well. So this was just an example of how the website advertises the functionality. What I did is I have some examples here, and I've built the to-do MVC application. All right, let's get it started. So to-do MVC is a kind of demo application, and it's built in many, many technologies and languages. And I've built it in pure Spring Boot and Thymeleaf. So this is just the application, and it's not using htmx currently at all. So if I just add a to-do item, I don't know if you can see it on the screen sharing, but it refreshes the page when I add one, when I put them completed, when I delete them. So everything is a page refresh. Now, we can apply the boost mode of htmx. And this is really adding just one tag to the HTML and adding the library. And let's refresh. And now I do just the same, but you'll see there's really no refresh at all. So I just built a single page application, adding just this one tag. So even the URL updates, everything works just fine. And there's no page refresh at all. If you look at the network tab here, you'll notice that everything stays the same as at this point. It's just htmx that intervenes and will do the calls and see the redirects, because it's still just the post and the redirect that we know from standard Thymeleaf. That's happening there, but it just uses that. So this is great with just one tag. I now have an SPA. But of course, there's no gain here in terms of how much data I send between the client and the server, because I'm still doing full page refreshes. So I built another demo, and we'll go into more detail on the code after I show the demo. And this one is really using htmx as it intended. So we'll just send little snippets back and forth. And I'll show that also in the dev tools. So in this version, when I add a to-do item, what's happening here, I don't know, let me try to increase the font size a bit. If you look at the response, yeah, so the response of the post request to create a new to-do item is only the list item. So just this part. I can do another one. Again, you see this. So it's only this part. Of course, you might wonder, how does the 2 items left get updated? Because that's not even part of the response. And what's happening there is the server can set certain response headers that will throw an event on the client side. And then other parts of the application can react to that. And this part here at the bottom left, it's on the lookout for the item added event. And when that item added event is happening somewhere on the page, it will do a get to the server to get the current active items count. And then it will return this whole HTML. And with the swap, we say just swap myself with the new version of myself. That's how it works in this case. So this is the application, and the first one I showed you was with the HX Boost. So that's really all there is to it. If you add HX Boost through and you add the library, you suddenly have a single page application out of your Thymeleaf application. For the second demo, where we have the more fine-grained updates, we need a dedicated controller that will send back the snippet of HTML. And there, in the add post mapping, we will say if there is an HTMX request in the header, so this indicates that htmx did the request, then this method will be called. We will return just the fragment of the to-do item there, and we'll set the item added trigger in the response. And then on the HTML side, we have this. So the trigger here is the enter. So I just type and I press enter, then it does a post to the root URL, and the swap says, whatever I receive, put it just at the end of before the end of the to-do list. So that's just appending each and every to-do item in the list dynamically. And then this is the code of the active items count, so the little thing that reacts to if there is an item added or if it's completed or removed. And then it does a get to the active items count URL. I've written another demo that showcases the case of an IoT dashboard. Let me just find it. All right, so here I have my IoT dashboard. It simulates like 6 devices that will show a temperature reading, and it takes a while to get the data from those sensors. So in standard Thymeleaf, what happens is on the server we iterate over the 6 and we ask the temperature of each of the one, and so it takes a while to refresh the page. So user experience, not that great. What we can do with htmx, we can just say, use the onload trigger. So what happens there, I immediately put the HTML on the page with the spinning indicator, and then the browser will fire 6 GET requests to get the temperature all together. And then the great thing is we immediately have feedback, and it seems like everything is a lot quicker that way. We can take this idea a bit further and add a refresh button so the user can manually refresh whatever device he wants to have refreshed. And if we have some lazy users, we can do an auto refresh as well. So this will just refresh every 5 seconds automatically. And we have this IoT dashboard very easily. We don't need to go all in on Angular or React to have this. So how does it look in code? This is the example where we have the load. So you can see the load trigger. So we show this with an SVG that's spinning. And then as soon as the page is loaded, htmx is active, it will trigger the hxget to the onload, and it will get the new information and swap the div with the new div that shows the actual value. For the refresh button, we have the same. But here the target is not ourselves, but the surrounding divs to make sure that everything is refreshed properly and updated properly. And then the auto refresh, it's just as simple as putting in every 5 seconds or whatever interval you want there. So that's simple if that's okay. If you want to go a bit further, then you can use server-sent events or use WebSockets to push updates from the server to the client. And I have a small demo on that as well. So I just have to start a second browser. Oh, where's Safari? So I'll log on with, auto refresh is not found, obviously. It was for the other demo. So I'll log on using the same user in both browsers. And what we have is just a button on the page. And take a closer look on both what's happening. This is using server-sent events to push updates from the server. And then each time the HTML snippet is sent over the server-sent event. And then at the end, it swaps out the progress bar as it's building it on the server side with a download link, for example. Pretty cool, right? Okay, let's continue. So when should you not use htmx? We've seen some really nice examples of htmx. And of course, nothing is ever a silver bullet. So where should you not use it? If there's a lot of client-side interaction that needs to be very, very immediate, that's like a pop-up menu. You would not use htmx for that. I would recommend Alpine.js there, or just plain JavaScript. Or you want to build a custom checkbox or things like that. Show modal, maybe depending on how difficult the modal dialog is. Of course, browser games, probably not best suited with htmx. And jwt.io, I don't know if you know this, you can put in your JWT token and it will decode it, and it has a big banner like, we do everything on the client side. Of course, you cannot do that with htmx because you're going to the server. So in my opinion, when should you use htmx is if you want to build a dynamic website without JavaScript headaches, then this is really, really very convenient. You can incrementally add this dynamic behavior as you go along. You can just start out with your normal pages, quickly build stuff, and then look, oh, on this page, yeah, we really want to dedicate more resources to that, more people working on that to make it more interactive, more easy for the user, so you can just add it incrementally. And what's great if you combine it with Thymeleaf is that you can build your whole page, use fragments on the page itself, and send those same fragments as little updates back with Thymeleaf and htmx. So the code is always the same. It's not like you have some part of your page and then you need to build exactly the same in pure JavaScript. You can just reuse the same thing. Now, you can use htmx today with Thymeleaf. That's not an issue, but it's not as easy as it could be. And I like to thank Clint Checkett and Oliver Drodboom for helping me with this library. And it's, it has just the default htmx Spring Boot Thymeleaf name, not very original, but it has two main things that make it easier to work with htmx. It has a Thymeleaf dialect, and it has some Spring Mvc helpers. And I'll show right now how this looks in code. By default, we have this th-attr, and it's like a catch-all thing in Thymeleaf where you can just add attributes to your elements at runtime. So here we want to add the get, the target, and the indicator. So the indicator is the little spinner that we saw. And while that works, it's not as easy to work with. So what we can do now with this library, we can just use hx column get, hx column target, and hx column indicator, and then use Thymeleaf code within that. So that's really great. And then if we look into the Spring Mvc helpers, we saw this code already. We have the add post mapping there. We need to inject the servlet response to set the headers, things like that. With the library, we can make this a bit easier. We can just add an annotation at hx request, and then this method will only be called when there's a post to the URL done from htmx. And we can say when this method is called, put an item added event in the response using the hx trigger. There's a lot more in that. You can inject an htmx request object and then do if statements if you want to do that. And one thing, and I really have to thank Oliver for his work on that, is the htmx response using out-of-band responses. So what are out-of-band responses? We saw in the example with the small updates where we have events at the client side to update other parts of the page. Of course, when you do that, there's two calls. There's the initial call returning the LE item, and then at the client, the client notices, oh, this event was sent, I need to update other parts of the page, do another request, like that. What you can do with out-of-band responses is you have the main content, and you can tag along other content there, and you indicate it with it's an out-of-band response, and then htmx will match the IDs with what is already on the page and what you're sending back, and then you can update both of those things at the same time. This is not possible using standard Thymeleaf, but it is possible with this library. You just do return a new htmx response, and you add both of the templates. So only in the out-of-band case, you add the hx swap out-of-bounds true, and then htmx will match the IDs and update that. So I also have a demo on that. So we go back to our to-do MVC example. And if we now open the DevTools and I add a to-do item, so we now only have one call going to the server. We see both the test is added and one item left is put there. And here we have the LE item, so this is this one with the cross. And then we have the active items count, which is added as an out-of-band swap, is also added there. So like that you can update multiple contents on the page. So for me it's still a bit of a question, when do you use events? When would you use out-of-band responses? I think time will tell when we use this more. At least you have the options there of choosing. So if you want to learn more about this, you can check the Discord of htmx. A lot of people active there in the Discord. There's my workshop tomorrow at 5 o'clock, where I will, but it's not about htmx, the workshop, it's about Thymeleaf and Spring Boot, so really aimed at beginners. If you don't know Thymeleaf, be sure to come to my workshop. And there's, of course, my book as well. And learning more about Spring, well, this conference is all about that, so enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.